You just told me during the Operation Castle East when you went to this bakery to get some halwa,
Sure.
baklava. So what did you hear?
Okay, so I'm just describing the political atmosphere in the town where I live. During the assault on Gaza, I returned to town from a trip to Jaffa, and when I returned, I entered this bakery. This is just at the end of my street. And as I entered, there's a group of men sitting outside drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes, saying, "Yeah, we need to kill all the leftists. We need to murder all the leftists. I don't care if I have to sit in jail for the rest of my life. We need to round them all up and kill them. I don't care." And yeah. And I mean, this kind of discourse, it's not uncommon. And, you kind of have to expect it from young men, right? Because that's the age when men maybe don't feel the weight of responsibility and, testosterone coursing through their veins. But these are adults. I'm talking about men in their 50s, probably, 40s, 50s. And this isn't in some back alley or in someone's living room. This is in the middle of the street, outside the main bakery, the biggest bakery in town. So the fact that you could speak this way in a public space without fear of consequence or shame, really speaks to the level of discourse in the country and the level of safety. How is public space a safe space? And so, of course, the gravest danger was to people in Gaza. Then after that, it was people in the West Bank and other parts of the country if you aren't Jewish. But my point is that even for Jewish people who are dissidents, who aren't racist, who believe in equality, even they are increasingly incited against. Even they are increasingly, especially during the war, the targets of racist violence or political violence. So this is the atmosphere in Dimona. Dimona is a town of about 50,000 people, and here I would say, I haven't looked at recent statistics, but based on the signs that were posted around the city during the last election cycle 2 years ago, most people vote either for the ruling Likud party or Shas, ultra-Orthodox right-wing party, or Habayit Yehudi, the Jewish Home Party, which is right-wing settler party. And so this is essentially, almost all of the voting population. And that translates into, an atmosphere here. We don't have rallies here. We don't have protests here. There's nothing to protest. There's nothing to rally at. Hey, how you doing? מה קורה?
מה קורה?
בסדר.
בסדר.
So, I mean, it's kind of a laid-back town because it's a small town, it's in the desert, and that generally has like a calming influence. It's not, and also, as I was describing earlier, it's a sundown town. Did I discuss that?
We heard that term in the documentary yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Did I discuss it with you already on camera?
No, not on camera, just off the record,
Okay.
I guess.
Okay. So I can say a few words about it since we're talking about Dimona. But did you want me to talk about myself?
Yeah, just the sundown town, and then I will ask you, how did David Sheen become this Israel critical investigating journalist who he is right now? Okay. But first, the sundown town thing.
So a little bit more about Dimona. It would be accurate to call Dimona a sundown town, probably like many other towns in the country, but I can only speak to the one I live in.
We just saw a woman wearing a niqab.
Yes. So just as we were passing by the post office, I pointed out to Martin, look, there's a niqabi woman, a woman wearing a niqab, which is a face covering, not just a head covering, but a face covering as well. And because Dimona is a city of almost nearly all, like 99% Jews or Hebrews, but no Palestinians or 0.00001. There may be one, just to say, so I don't run into any trouble. But next to zero Palestinian people, okay, that's the settlement pattern. But more to the point, when I say that it's a sundown town, I mean by that you won't find Palestinian people here after sundown. So during the day, you can see Bedouin men, Bedouin women come to town, drink at a cafe, buy a sandwich, buy a falafel sandwich, going to the bank, going to the post office, because this is the town that provides services, whether they're food services,
Getting
going to do
cash from
groceries,
the ATM.
or getting cash from the ATM, or going to the bank, mailing letters. So people do come from the surrounding villages, come to Dimona in order to, do services, but that's in the daytime. At night, okay, first of all, it's not that Dimona is a hot spot and it has bars and clubs where people come anyways at night, but, Bedouin youth don't have a lot to do if you live in a teeny tiny village, so people will come to the town in order to, see what's happening, especially during the summer. It's nice weather, people are just like walking around, chilling, and the police make efforts to ensure that there will be no contact between Bedouins and Israeli Jews. And the way they do this is, there's a couple of ways that they do this.
Yeah, how?
So I've personally seen people drink in public parks, people drink publicly. I've never seen a Jewish person, no matter how much they puke afterwards, or I've never seen a Jewish person, taken away by police or charged or ticketed for drinking publicly. But if you see, I've seen, Bedouin people, if they're sitting in a park, a public park, drinking beer, they'll, the cops will basically crack down on them and ticket them. But, the effort to drive them out of public space, you'll never see it happen to Jews. But more to the point, there's anti-miscegenation patrols that are police sponsored. So there's groups of Israeli Jews who organize patrols, vehicular patrols, in which they drive around town at night with police coordination, with police approval. And they do this, and when they see groups of Bedouin people in town, then they harass them, they stop them, and they have police authority to do this. The police give them the authority to do this. And they stop the Bedouin people, and they harass them, and they bother them, and they harangue them, and the idea is to drive them away from Jewish, explicitly, this is the reason why. Because they don't want Israeli Jewish women and Palestinian Bedouin men to socialize. And so that's what I mean when I say it's a sundown town. It's not that they're chasing them out with whips and lynching them, but they're policing the public space in order to make sure that there's no Palestinian people here after dark having social relations with Jewish people, both by over-policing specific populations, the Palestinian population, and by openly, confronting them and just for being in the city and trying to separate them physically from Israeli women.
Okay, now how did you become this investigating journalist, and what
Do you want to wait for? Oh, sure, I can speak a little bit about how I became the person that I am. It's a continuing, evolving process, of course, like all of us. But so just briefly, I grew up in a Jewish, Israeli, Zionist family, and I already described how I grew up in Canada, but we spent the summers here, often visiting my cousins and uncles and aunts and grandparents who all lived here. Almost all my family was living here. And I also went to a Jewish school, a Zionist school, a religious school, and so these informed my views of the world and my understanding of the world. My understanding of the history of this country was informed by the Zionist narrative that I was taught in school, and by Jewish youth groups and Jewish synagogue and Jewish neighborhood. And in any case, that was the only story that I knew. After I graduated high school and started going to university, it was really my first opportunity to make friends who were not Jewish, and to hear other stories. And so, but still, I didn't really know any Palestinian people. Like I had Muslim friends, but they were mainly Pakistani, and so I didn't really know any Palestinians on a personal level. It wasn't really until I came here, actually, at the age of 25, I moved here. It was 1999. I moved to Israel, began living here. I was living in Tel Aviv, and within pretty much a month and a half, my whole political outlook completely changed, completely flipped. And I guess you could say that before I moved here, I was what you'd call PEP, which is progressive except for Palestine. So, anti-racist, anti-sexist, what we'd consider progressive political ideas. Without going into too much detail, but except like a bit of a blind spot around Israel and Palestine, because that was like the exception. My views about Israel and Palestine were still stuck in the previous paradigm. And then when I moved here, within a month, I just from actually being here and having real life interactions with people, experiences, they swung me to a completely different perspective. To be specific, I was living in Tel Aviv, and in the building where I was living there was renovations, and the people who were doing those renovations were Palestinian men from Nablus. And so, just as I was walking in and out of the building, we would just converse. We'd have, I'd say, "Hey, how you doing? Good morning. Hey, how's it going?" And then, those conversations turned into cigarette breaks and into coffee breaks and into conversation, invitations to visit, and just over time, just getting to know them as individuals, as human beings, I started to learn more about their lives, and then I started to realize about the injustice of why did they have to leave at like 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning to get to the job site to do construction work on my home? And then I had never realized any of these things. I'd only been told that the reason for the occupation was security. And the more I talked to them, I realized that it was economic, that there was that they were being exploited, that this situation was being perpetuated for decades, consciously, and that it had the result of exploiting a whole class of people, and that this wasn't a temporary situation, and this was supposed to be during the peace years of the Oslo era. So realizing this, and since I in my heart, believed in equality of all people, and realized that these people were being discriminated against in order to exploit them, it turned me against the system. It made me understand the intrinsic oppressive, discriminatory nature of the system. And so my whole viewpoint switched, and then of course there were things that occurred afterwards, but that was like the first switch for me. And I, at that point, 1999 is when I began blogging, and I blogged for a decade before I began writing professionally. I was just writing about what I was experiencing here, living in the country, and over the course of my travels. And then I began editing and writing for Haaretz in 2010. And I guess that's like the main points of how I began writing and how my political ideas began to first develop. Is that good?